Welcome to Should I Read It? Should I Read It is a weekly podcast that takes a deep dive into books. I'll provide a summary of the book and tell you how the ideas in the book relate across all the books we've covered so far. In today's episode of Should I Read It, we're going to look at Paid to Think by David Goldsmith. If you're a big list person, then this is going to be a book you'll love. Not so much into lists, then maybe you should skip it. So much of what we do in work is thinking. Yeah, developers type code into a page, and that code is what clients think they're paying for, but the truth is that they're paying you doing smart decisions. I wrote a whole post on why smart decisions are the only freelance skill that's going to stick around. And you'll find a link to that one in the show notes. Learning to make those smart decisions with proper information is what Paid to Think by David Goldsmith is all about. Here's a quote from his book. So the big question is, what should you be thinking about? I promise that by the time you reach the end of this book, you'll have a definitive and possibly surprising answer to that question. And you'll also possess an abundance of tools that will enable you to convert your thoughts into realities. Paid to Think has been written so that you will know more precisely where to focus your energies and how to put your newfound knowledge into immediate and practical use. There's a great book by Dr. Seuss called Yertle the Turtle. In this story, King Yertle is the ruler of all that he can see. Realizing that if he can get his subjects to form a tower, he can see further, he gets them all to stand on each other's backs, and he gets at the top. Then it comes crashing down when one lowly turtle realizes that he doesn't have to stand for this. Dr. Seuss is teaching us a lesson in greed. And while Paid to Think isn't venturing into that realm, I kept thinking of Yertle as I read the book. The core issue with the book is that it's got 5 steps for everything. Or 8 steps or 2 steps. Then inside each step, there's 5 sub-steps, with 3 rules and 4 ways you can adapt each rule based on a change in sub-step 3. I kept thinking about all the rules and lists and steps and pages to print, and they were a big pile of turtles to me. The deeper you went, the more turtles you found, with more steps going on and on and on. More than once, I'd be 3 pages of notes into step 3 to realize that I had no idea what step 3 was about and what it was all going to lead back to. So I'd read it again, only to get lost on sub-step 2. It got bad enough that it was all I could do to finish the book without skimming everything. Like that high school student reading with a fan, pointing at the pages so they flip faster. Further, I don't think that a freelance business could do anything close to the ideal put forward in this book. In fact, I don't think that most businesses that aren't operating at a multinational scale could do most of it. I'd have to hire 5 people to do my work and fill out all the sheets and stuff in the book, even to be able to attempt most of it to the depth like Goldsmith describes. Now, with that caveat out of the way, let's look at some of the good that can be found in Paid to Think. The main idea that Goldsmith is telling us about is called enterprise thinking. This is simply his term for the thinking tools he has. I actually never found a clear explanation of why enterprise was the word, except maybe that you can't do it unless you are in fact an enterprise. He also talks a bunch about cyclonic thinking. This is simply his term to tell us that we jump around between these tools. Many times he seems to use these terms mainly as a way to give himself intellectual property that he can sell to others. In fact, many of the thinking tools follow this model. He uses an established process and then says he adds enterprise to it, or cyclonic in the middle, and calls it his own tool. One idea that did resonate with me, being a ready, fire, aim type, was this. Here's a quote from the book. You can never underestimate the value of thinking before taking action, especially when you're ready to invest labor, capital, time, and your reputation. Paid to Think is broken up into 4 main groups of topics. Chapter 1 is laying the groundwork for terms and ideas so that you can venture into the rest of the book and get less lost. Chapter 2 is all about getting you to question your assumptions and beliefs so that you can see what might be holding you back. The meat of the book is found in chapters 3 through 14. These are where you'll find the thinking tools of enterprise thinking. The final chapter 15 is mostly inspirational. It's telling you stories of how others have taken the thinking tools into their own work and started to kick ass. It's getting you to leave on a high note so that you'll be more likely to put the tools into practice. Now, according to Goldsmith, there are 4 categories that solid enterprise thinking is made up of. First is strategizing. Second is learning. Third is performing. Fourth is forecasting. Goldsmith says that all 4 categories are connected. You'll jump through them and around in them in this whole cyclonic thinking thing. Then he introduces us to 7 crosses of enterprise thinking. You're starting to see the stack of turtles here. His 7 crosses of ET are 1. Cross-functional, so that it works in every department. 2, cross-level, works senior to junior. 3, cross-industry. 4th is cross-sector, so that's public, private, IPO. 5th, cross-cultural. 6th, cross-time, so enterprise thinking is historical or present day. And 7th, cross-life, so work at home. This is another fault starting to show in the book, or at least showing again. The foreword to the book makes such a huge, bold claims about how it will transform everything in your life that I have no idea how any author could ever live up to it. The 7 crosses feel the same way. Goldsmith is saying that his system is the best for everything all the time. That's a huge claim to make, and one that's contrary to the mental model theory. There's a link to Farnham Street in the show notes if you want to look into what mental models are. With the mental models approach, you'd ensure that you have the tools from Paid to Think and many others. Then you'd apply the best tool for the job. In fact, you'd make sure that you can apply at least 2 tools, 2 mental frameworks to it. If you can't, that would mean you either don't have the mental tools proper enough to dig in, or you don't understand the problem with enough depth. Now, the beliefs we have limit us. They limit us in subtle ways. We start to see success, and then we sabotage ourselves without thinking about it. If you want to dig deeper into that idea of limiting our own success, then The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks is a great book, and there's a link to that in the show notes. One of the core contentions around what limits us as managers and Paid to Think is that instead of being leaders leading from the field, we're managers sitting back in a cozy room sending people out to do our bidding. Here's a quote from Goldsmith. When managers entered the scene, leaders moved from their on-the-field command positions to the seclusion of the executive office, rendering many, although certainly not all, decision makers out of touch with the realities that challenge their organizations. This is faulty because so many managers are then out of touch with anything that happens at work. In a recent Freakonomics episode, they discussed this idea as it pertains to CEOs. Does an outside CEO or an internal one that came up through the ranks perform better? The data says that an internal one does, and at a cheaper cost. There isn't even a contest between the 2 models, in fact. Internal people who understand the culture and the goals of departments win, hands down. These external CEOs often put way too much faith in a revolutionary idea instead of consistent improvement. Here's a quote from Goldsmith. Many decision makers put a lot of pressure on themselves to come up with the next killer idea, believing that they have to wow customers, prospective employees, or other stakeholders in order to win sales, key talent, or other advantages for their organizations. But you don't always have to reel in the big fish to enjoy great rewards. In fact, more often than people realize, great rewards don't necessarily come from earth-shattering factors. Instead, they are often the result of minor factors that cause us to win or lose by a nose. Well, this section does an okay job of getting us to question some of the beliefs we have. There's much better books out there like The Big Leap, which I already referred to. Now we're on to the 3rd section of the book, and what the meat of the book really is, the tools of enterprise thinking. First was category 1, strategizing. Goldsmith says that the order of the thinking tools don't actually matter, but this is a book, and thus we consume it in a linear fashion, and we got to pick somewhere to start with. So strategizing. This is also where we start bogging down the steps and sub-steps and rules and 3 ways you might make exception to Rule 5a. I'm really only going to highlight a few parts of the rest of the book. The rest is so buried in a stack of turtles that I couldn't even make sense of it. First, what is your challenge? Let's dive in with a quote right away. An excellent strategy executed poorly is still better than a poor strategy executed well. One of the keys to thinking in general is not trying to rush it. When I start my new notebook, I take a few hours to think back through where I'm at and where I want to be. Another quote from Goldsmith. During the strategizing process, anytime you feel the urgency to push forward quickly, slow down, harness those urges instead. Rushing is going to result in a weaker strategy. A weaker strategy will harm your success. The part that I've come back to a number of times and helped me reframe the problems in my business is his method for finding your challenges and seeing if they are the most important single thing you can be working on. It starts by writing down a single statement for your challenge. Note the word challenge, because it can be a problem or an opportunity. Using challenge helps make it more agnostic. Then, you walk through a number of questions to help you figure out if this is really a challenge or a symptom of the challenge. Some of the questions are, is this only one challenge? So if you have a challenge and there's an and in the middle, that's probably 2. Another one is it a problem now, or am I dwelling on something that already happened, or something so far in the future that I can't even do anything about it? Another one is, did I write down what I actually think is the solution to what I'm dealing with? There were a few others, but it was a third one that I really keyed on. My problem right now is lack of sales. But when I started the work, I wrote down that it was not enough people know me. My thinking was that if more people knew me, of course I'd get more sales. But that's not true. Lack of sales could be because of a few things. I could have terrible products, I could have poor on-page marketing, and it could be that more people need to be familiar with it. Going through the work to define my challenge had me start surveying my readers about content. Next, I'll dig into my on-page marketing and learn about how to do that best for the products I have. Then with those two items solved to the extent that I can perfect them, I can dig into what I thought my original problem was, getting more people to know me. The final great step in this is the what would it take question. I asked myself, what would it take to know that my products fit my market? Then I started to develop the survey. I've started to introduce earlier versions of the products to the members in my community so I can test and refine them. Here's a quote from Goldsmith. Decision makers find that asking what would it take questions gives them more, better, and different macro tactics from which to choose. As a result, they put themselves and their organizations in stronger positions to achieve their desired outcome, and they avoid costly, preventable mistakes. This question is similar to one I've heard Tim Ferriss talk about. He asks himself, what would this look like if it was easy? Then he uses his leverage to make sure that even if things crash, he's got a fairly easy ride, or at least options to get the work out there and how he wants to get it out. This single idea and work on reframing was the best concept in the whole book. If you're going to read Paid to Think, find this section, then you can stop. In Star Wars mythology, there's the Sith rule of 2. There can only ever be a master and an apprentice. This stopped the fighting amongst themselves until a point where the apprentice was strong enough to kill the master and become the master. We see a similar bad dynamic with so many projects. We have 9,000 things on our plates and there's just no way to handle them all. This is where Goldsmith puts forward his second great idea, the rule of 2. You can only ever work on 2 projects at a time. That's 2 major projects. You still have emails to return and meetings to go to, but only ever 2 major projects. If you violate this, you'll be overloaded. Here's a quote from Paid to Think. Too many projects overload people with too many thoughts, details, and activities, which ultimately leads to decreased performance levels, like an instance where an individual is working on a spreadsheet, becomes interrupted, loses his or her train of thought, and makes a small error in calculation that could snowball into disastrous results later. This has changed how I build out my quarterly plans. No more trying to push forward 3 big books or anything like that. I pick one, and if that project goes fast enough, I move on to the next one. On top of that, I have 1 client project. That's it. 2 main projects at a time. The rest I need to say no to because they'll only harm my overall output. If I need the income, I need to start charging more because I can only handle 1 client project at a time. Alongside this idea of only ever working on 2 projects is the idea of only ever scheduling part of your day. Here's a quote from Goldsmith. A good rule of thumb is to schedule no more than 60% of your day, because planning is not an exact science, and you never know what interruptions, unforeseen opportunities, problems, and other unexpected activities can encroach on your schedule. This idea flies a bit in the face of people like Cal Newport, who schedules every minute of his day. According to Goldsmith, you should only ever be scheduling that 60%. The rest is for dealing with things that will throw you off track. You do see a similar idea in the 12-week year. In that book, they recommend you put a few buffer blocks in each day. The buffer blocks are around so that you have space for life and work to happen without feeling like you're getting behind all the time. In the rest of the book, Goldsmith talks about his method for developing new product ideas, which has 3 steps. First is ideation, so getting the ideas. Second is elimination. There's a whole filtering process. Third is development, getting them going. Each step has many sub-steps and sub-items and exceptions to the sub-items and rules. No, you can't keep track of what they are. He wrote a whole chapter on establishing alliances in businesses and differentiating between what is an alliance and what is not. In general, the people you are working with don't benefit from the upsides. They have a hand in helping. They're not partners, they're vendors. Goldsmith dives into technology, but uses so much jargon as to make the starting almost impossible to understand. He also falls into what Cal Newport would call any benefit thinking. This is the idea that if there is some benefit, we just should be pursuing the idea. We don't weigh the negatives that may come from the new ideas and the new techniques. Here's a quote from Goldsmith. The internet allows customers, patients, clients, patrons, and other stakeholders to tap into your organization's products and services at times and locations that are convenient to them. Newer phone technologies have given people the flexibility to do their work just about any place in the world with an internet connection, as if they were sitting in their offices. He does come back around later with a one-off sentence to evaluate the real benefit of new technology, but it's a passing comment in the midst of a lot of whole rah for new stuff. One great idea in the midst of his discussion on technology is making sure that your staff have the right tools in place to do their job well. Here's a quote from Goldsmith. Give your staff the necessary resources and guidance to learn how to use new technology and to integrate it into their daily work life. means time, training, new tools. It brought to mind one job that I had where it would take 15 minutes for the computer to start, then 5 for Photoshop, and each tool action took 15 to 20 seconds to do anything. It was impossible to meet any realistic expectations of producing work in a timely fashion, and my boss was mad at my lack of productivity. You could lament the time it took, but make sure that you have given your people the tools they need and the training to use those tools. Far too many problems aren't with the people. The tools aren't allowing them to do the work that they're trying to do. The second category of thinking tools is deals with learning. What to learn and how to learn effectively. Here's a quote from Goldsmith. We are overloaded with daily opportunities to learn. It starts early, from the time we read our morning newspapers, ends late, after we've watched the late night news before bedtime, and we're hit all day in between with digital feeds and streaming news reports. Then there are magazines, books, people, seminars, and training sessions that we seek out as a way of concentrating our focus on specific topics of information. But at the end of our continuous daily cycles of learning, do we really have that much useful and valuable information at our disposal? All the tools he mentions have Cyclonic in them. We're developing intellectual property here, people, so just go with it. Goldsmith does provide a great differentiation between knowledge of something and awareness of it, though. You might be aware of a new technology, but have little to no knowledge of it. He uses the idea that you don't let someone aware of what heart surgery is perform the surgery. You want someone with first-hand knowledge. As you're looking to gather knowledge, make sure that you're giving more weight to those sources with first-hand knowledge that's current. People who have less knowledge or experience that's long past, they just get less weight. Paid to Think also exhorts a business to have a learning mentality throughout its positions. Here's a quote from Paid to Think. When everyone on staff adopts a learning mentality and seeks out awareness and knowledge from a variety of sources, their increased awareness and knowledge banks multiply the potential of your organization. Unfortunately, telling us that we need to have a culture of learning is where Goldsmith stops. There's a little concrete advice on how to build that environment in your workplace. When it comes to global awareness, Goldsmith has a few tools that amount to being aware of how global events can affect your business. Now, I worked for a canoe shop that saw the US war effort ramping up in the early 2000s, and they rightly deduced that carbon and Kevlar would be in demand for military applications. They purchased a decades-long supply of it at lower prices, and then spent the next number of years using the tried and true materials no one else could get at a formerly reasonable price. They invested in finding and trying new materials because they had a long runway to perfect things before they had to ship these new things to their customers. This is the type of global thinking and learning Goldsmith wants us to be making. There's a bunch more content before the end. I didn't even talk about some parts of enterprise thinking that I mentioned at the beginning. Specifically, I'm not mentioning performing and forecasting. These sections mostly repeated tools you learned about already in the book, but they add another 3 tweaks to the already existing 5 steps and 3 sub-steps with 4 adjustments. It was so bogged down, I couldn't pull much out of it despite trying to read it 2 or 3 times in some parts. This episode of Should I Read It is brought to you by the 8-Week Business Bootcamp. If you're tired of struggling with your business, tired of not getting the traction you want, tired of working overtime with little to show for it, then Bootcamp is for you. Join me to get your business back on track and still have time to see your family. You'll find a link for Bootcamp in the show notes. Now, as always, our final question is, should you read Paid to Think? There are a few core great ideas in Paid to Think. The reframing work particularly is really good. Rule of 2, I love and always makes me think of Star Wars. It's awesome. When you encounter issues with staff, making sure that they have the right tools to do the job. Perfect. But oh my goodness, so much of it is bogged down with lists and steps and sub-steps and 3 adjustments. So read the first bit. When you're done, just be done. Don't bother reading the whole book. It strikes me as more of a quest for pushing intellectual property of the author than a way of effectively giving tools to the size of business that I run. Thanks for listening to Should I Read It? To support the show, you can leave me a review in iTunes or a heart or a star in whatever podcast player you use. These help more people find the show. If you want to get more reading done, you should get an Audible membership. If you use curtismchale.ca/recommends/audible, that will help the production of the show financially. In our next episode of Should I Read It, we're going to work through a new marketing book from CoSchedule founder Garrett Moon. If you want to get started early, then go purchase the 10X Marketing Formula.